we spoke yesterday about cognitive dissonance, right? And if you want to experience cognitive dissonance, or an amazing example of it, you're looking at it, because that is the complete written works of William Shakespeare of Stratford. That's everything that historical figure ever wrote that there's any record of. When I first got shown this, I sort of looked at it and went, well, hang on, that can't be right. And it took me an awfully long time to kind of process the fact that William Shakespeare of Stratford couldn't write his name. Like, you know, if you compare that to a child's handwriting, what you're saying, 3 or 4, maybe that they've done maybe a couple of 100 hours practice in their life with a pen. And that's nowhere near what you need to do. You need to do thousands of hours. We all remember school. You know, it takes a lot. It's muscle memory. It takes a long time. The person who signed these signatures, there's no way he wrote a poem that went, the cat sat on the mat, let alone shall I compare thee to a summer's day or anything like that.
The A there is like really out of place. It's like he knows how to do an A, but the rest he's like...
You're showing up. He put the A in the middle. William Shakespeare. I don't know how he did that. But a couple of things about these. First of all, it's absolutely certain that this is the handwriting of William Shakespeare of Stratford, because these are signed in legal documents that were witnessed. So a couple of these are from his will. And people say, oh, he must have been really ill when he wrote his will, but they try and explain away the fact that Shakespeare couldn't write his own name. So these are from his will. That's absolutely, or at least 2 of them, I think, are from his will. These are witness signatures. There was no, like, legal documents. There's no better proof you could have than a witnessed signature. That's why they're on wills. The other thing to say is that this guy whose signature you're looking at, on his birth certificate and on his death certificate, his name was William Shakespeare, S-B-U-R. So not actually Shakespeare at all, William Shakespeare. It's possible that when he went to London, he decided to, you know, posh himself up and give his name a bit of a makeover and started calling himself William Shakespeare, but that wasn't his legal name. And there are loads of things about this person that just don't add up. Like, in his will, he didn't own a single book. Like, there's no books, no papers, no, oh, I was halfway through writing this poem. No books, no papers, nothing like that in his will. There's no literature of any kind in his life. There's also the fact that he died, what was it, in 1616, I think? And at that point, something like half the plays that are now ascribed to William Shakespeare had never been performed in public. So not only has he got no books and no papers, no letters, nothing like that at all when he dies. I think it is 18, but there's at least 12 plays of his that have never before been performed in public. So where are they? And how is it that a self-made man was able to write all these things that take months, if not years, and then never do anything with them? It's very strange. Look at his family a bit more broadly. His mum and dad were 100% illiterate. They could not write. On all their legal documents, you get them scribing an X. So that's his parents couldn't write. Again, there's not a single book in the house. And his daughters, his surviving children, his daughter anyway, Anne Hathaway, couldn't sign her own name. Whoever wrote the works of Shakespeare was very, very good, right? Very, very, very good. Is it conceivable that that person wouldn't have any books or papers at home, that their parents and their children would all be illiterate? It just doesn't fit the playwright's lifestyle, the playwright's profession. Now, I mentioned about Shakespeare and the signatures and so on in my book, Architecture of Power, really to make the point that this is a very, very sharp example of cognitive dissonance. I mean, when I don't blame anyone for being skeptical about this, because it takes a lot of time to process. Just look at that handwriting. Look at it. There's no way you could professionally write a play in that handwriting, right? So then some people say, oh, he had a scribe. Now, how did the son of a glove maker from Stratford, who was an actor, not a well-paid job, come into London and just be so brilliant that someone would write it all down for him? It doesn't make any sense. Now, I mentioned in my book, this book, which is called Shakespeare's Unorthodox Biography. This is what several people recommend if you're interested in evidence when looking at Shakespeare, because what the author Diana Price does is she goes through all the written record from about, I'm going to say 1550 to 1625, something like that, the period when Shakespeare was alive. And she goes through all the noted poets from the era. So I'd heard of Ben Jonson and Christopher Marlowe, but there's Thomas Neal, Samuel Daniel, Edmund Spenser, Philip Maniger. There's 20 odd poets. And what she does is she goes through and says, well, look, is there evidence for the poet's education? In every case, there's receipts and so on that prove where the poet was educated. In Shakespeare's case, he was supposed to be educated at the grammar school in Stratford, but uniquely, the records for those years when he was meant to be there are missing. Records before he was meant to be there are there. Records after he was meant to be there were there. When Shakespeare's name would have been in the register, those records have disappeared. So there's no evidence of Shakespeare having an education, for example. There's no evidence of him having any written correspondence, letters. There's no evidence of him being paid to write. There's no evidence of him having any relationship with like a patron or a lord who pays his wage. There's no original manuscripts whatsoever. There's nothing that he wrote apart from these signatures. There's no handwriting inscriptions, receipts, letters, or anything like that. No, what she calls commendatory verses. Poets would write each other little poems saying how wonderful they all were and laugh about how clever they were. There's nothing like that. At death, as a writer, when writers died, other writers made a massive deal out of it. They all wrote poems to each other, celebrating that person, trying to big up their reputation. When Shakespeare died, no one noticed. He died, obviously, in Stratford, back in London. There wasn't a ripple socially. There wasn't any reaction to this supposed greatest poet of all time, this greatest playwright of all time, this man from Stratford dying. There was nothing. The silence was, you could say, deafening. Now, this book goes on, and there's other things she evidences, but none of the evidence you'd expect to find from the life of a poet. Debts, if nothing else. Someone would keep record of debts. There's nothing, there's no literary chain. He does not exist in a paper way, in a way you'd expect. Like for Ben Jonson, they got all his work, his written works, his handwritten works, and like they put them in a folio, right? They kind of bind them all together. And these massive folios of people's work, for all of those people I mentioned and others who, all of them have records like that, and there's nothing for Shakespeare. So there's the absence of evidence, right? The complete absence of evidence. And then there's a lot of work has been done in the last 100 years about trying to piece together who it was who actually wrote these incredible works of literature, right? I'm going to say the smart money is on a guy called Edward de Vere, who was the 17th Earl of Oxford. Now, why would you cover this up? Yada, yada, yada. There's an incredible story here that has actually been made into a movie. You can check that out online. Called Anonymous. I know Anonymous is associated with those hackers in masks. It's not that. It's Anonymous. Check out Anonymous. Maybe Google Anonymous Shakespeare. You'll see it's been put into a movie. But the story goes, and this is what people, especially in the States, who have investigated the situation a bit more objectively, they've got less skin in the game, you could say, maybe than the English. People in the States have, for the last 100 years, been put forward forensic reasons for why Edward de Vere was Shakespeare, and for why, towards the end of de Vere's life and career as a writer, he was figuratively buried. He was cut out of any association with the plays. By that point, he was a ruined man. So he was the 17th Earl of Oxford, and he inherited at the age of 12 one of the richest earldoms in the country. It was Oxfordshire. He owned Oxfordshire. It's a good gig. He could afford to get anything he wanted. Now his origins, let's say, are a little bit murky. It's not entirely clear who his parents were, or that would be what a lot of people say. Queen Elizabeth famously was reigning at the time. Now she's known to history as the Virgin Queen, and I'm going to shock all your audience here. She wasn't a virgin. And it's very, 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 very likely she had kids. And this is part of the story of Edward de Vere. It's certain that a fella called Thomas Seymour, sexually assaulted or raped Elizabeth when she was about 14. He was later executed for that. And she had to go on retreat, which, would imply, or it seems reasonable to infer, because she did it more than once in her career. She went on retreat for about 9 months, if you see what I mean. And a few weeks after that, some aristocrat had a ginger-haired baby. Coincidences happen, right? It's possible that Edward de Vere was the product of her pregnancy and was sort of adopted by the Earl of Oxford. Edward de Vere, if you look at a picture of him, there's a few of them. Mentioned also now, just to drop his name, Robert Devereux, who became the Earl of Essex. If you look at them, there was a surprising number of ginger, sort of aquiline aristocrats being born just as Elizabeth hit her sort of late teens and early 20s. So it's possible that Edward de Vere was her son. This is certainly what a lot of people say. I should probably mention the guy Thomas Loney, who first put this theory about Edward de Vere forward, what Loney did was look at Hamlet, because Hamlet is said to be the most autobiographical of Shakespeare's plays, right? He puts the most of himself in it. And what Loney did was look at Hamlet and what Hamlet did, and then look at people in Elizabeth's court and what they did. And Hamlet wrote plays. He lost his father. His best friend was Horatio, kidnapped by pirates. There are lots and lots of... Basically, if you look at Hamlet's life in the play, it's very, 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 very close to De Vere's. And specifically, there are characters that are in Hamlet, a guy called Polonius, who's based on Edward de Vere's father-in-law, a guy called Robert Cecil. So the story of Edward de Vere, or the identity of Edward de Vere, was deduced by Thomas Loney by looking at all these comparisons between the autobiography, that, if you like, that is Hamlet, and the biography of Edward de Vere. That's how he was identified. What came next was a series of theories coming forward from people who just added to Loney's insight that it was de Vere who was probably the author. Yeah, well, it's called the Prince Tudor theory. This is not my theory. I've just read this. It's what they say. So maybe in his 20s, de Vere, as Earl of Oxford, started appearing at court. And he was a very, very literate man. He's well known as a great writer. Everyone praised his poetry. He was obviously a very sophisticated guy. He spoke Greek. It's likely that he translated Ovid when he was a child. There's a translation ascribed to a guy called Golding, and Golding was Edward de Vere's tutor. Similarly, Queen Elizabeth, when she was young, had translated Tacitus, the Roman historian, and it's likely Edward de Vere translated Ovid when he was being educated. Very well-educated man, money no object, and as it turned out, a bit of a dandy. So when he turned up at court, there was this young, erudite, ginger courtier, and the Prince Tudor hypothesis, it says, or this theory is, that they fell in love or had some kind of affair. So that's mother and son. It's not entirely clear at what point they would have realised that, or if indeed that was something that was known to them, or what. I mean, it's a bit beyond imagination. It's like Freud come true. But this is the Prince Tudor theory, and I can go into why people say this is not completely ridiculous, or like why it's likely in a bit. But the fact is, another ginger aristocrat was born, and he was Henry Wriothesley, the Earl of Southampton. Talk about in a bit. He was involved in what was called the Essex Rebellion with Robert Devereux, another ginger-haired young male aristocrat who seemed to think he had some say in who should inherit the throne. So Edward de Vere, as well as having a relationship with Elizabeth, the theory goes, definitely did a lot of writing. There's huge amounts of his writing in very good handwriting. You know, he knew how to hold a pen. And some of it is identical, I'm going to say, or like over 95% identical. For example, there's a play he wrote called Henry V, and it's the same as the Shakespeare play. I mean, the characters, some of the dialogue apparently is a bit different. All the character names, all the scenes, all the setting, all the planning. That play had been played in playhouses in London before Shakespeare was even meant to have come to London. So there are all these questions of continuity, but Edward de Vere was definitely very prolific, and he put together what he might have called, was a Masonic lodge of some form, but you could call him the Band of Brothers. He was known as a massive patron of poets. He was the Earl of Oxford. Yeah, come around to my house. We'll write poetry together. I don't know, we'll drink wine and do whatever else was available to an earl. He had a bunch of guys around him, known as sort of Oxford's men almost. I mean, he was Lord High Chamberlain, and he did have an acting troupe. The Lord Chamberlain's men was his acting troupe. So I mean, he was an earl. He had a lot of money. He was the richest earl, I think, in the country, and he was potentially the heir apparent to Queen Elizabeth. One thing I'll send you is his signature. Beautifully done, and he draws a little crown over his name and puts 7 dashes. So he's kind of like indicating, people say he's indicating that he's the future Edward VII, i.e. Elizabeth's heir. And if he'd signed his name like that, with putting the little crown on, putting the little 7 in there, and he wasn't her heir, and someone had got hold of that, he'd have probably been a dead man, because saying you're going to be king after the Queen's dead, even talking about the monarch's death, could be construed as treason. He was signing his name in a way that would have been a death warrant if he hadn't legitimately been able to claim the acquiescence or whatever Queen Elizabeth to sign his name, Edward VII. It would have been it would have killed him if he hadn't had permission. So you've got this incredible life of this incredible guy, Edward de Vere, and he was clearly a bit of a mover and shaker, very popular in court, and then something happened. I'm going to say what a lot of people said happened was Henry Wriothesley, the baby he had with his mother. And at some point, someone probably worked it out. And, you know, if you're, I'm going to mention now again this guy, Robert Cecil. He's the sort of power behind the throne. He's the guy who's really running the day-to-day government. Now, if you're running a day-to-day government with all these aristocrats running off, just going mental, how the hell do you manage that situation? The heir to the throne is also the brother of the Queen. And it just, I mean, you know, I mean, you can't get your head around that. So that was pretty much at the same time Edward de Vere lost favour, was pretty much the same time Queen Elizabeth became a virgin. The whole virgin queen thing started being pumped out. So there's no way she could have, you know, she never had sex, so she can't have kids. She's like on a pedestal. So that was the work of Robert Cecil, who knew Edward de Vere very, very well, because Edward de Vere was married to Anne Cecil, Robert Cecil's sister. And that was not a happy marriage. That was kind of, I'm going to say, an arranged marriage, a forced marriage. Edward de Vere, as the Earl of Oxford, was told by the Cecils, you're going to marry our daughter. Let's just say he wasn't very happy about that. But what that meant was the Cecils, by marrying Edward de Vere, meant his grandchild, his daughter's child, would be the next in line, on the basis that Edward de Vere was the heir apparent, right? So the Cecils, by marrying in or forcing Edward de Vere to get married, ensured their inclusion, let's say, in the royal succession. But that didn't happen, obviously. That all went tits up. And what Robert Cecil ended up doing was saying, look, we're not going to have a ginger anything. Like, when ginger is out, just look at what, you know, just look at the trouble Harry's caused. Ginger's bad karma for the royal family. I don't know how you want to put it. And he organised the succession of James I from Scotland. He did it secretly as Elizabeth was getting older. He wrote letters to all the different main aristocrats in the country saying, I, Robert Cecil, suggest we have King James of Scotland come down and be the next king. Will you agree with me? And he got all these people to agree with him in letters. So about 40 or 50 of the main aristocratic families were all like, yeah, we'll choose James Stewart. And that really pissed off a lot of people who were ginger-haired and aristocratic, especially Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex. Because in 1601, as Elizabeth, I think she died in 1603, so she was getting on. He organised what's called the Essex Rebellion in the sort of January, February of 1601, with Henry Wriothesley, another ginger young aristocrat, tried to foment a rebellion. They failed, and Robert Devereux was executed, as you'd expect. Leading an armed insurrection in medieval London, you're going to get your head cut off. Henry Wriothesley, who the Prince Tudor hypothesis says was Elizabeth's son with Edward de Vere. Henry Wriothesley, who was also there, was also part of the rebellion, was just let off. He wasn't even punished. So one earl was beheaded and one earl was let literally off without any punishment whatsoever. So that's another aspect of Henry Wriothesley's part in this. The other, I might as well mention this now. Academics say you can't tell who Shakespeare dedicated his sonnets to, Mr. W.H. or H.W. Now, that's Henry Wriothesley. But if you agree with that identification that all the sonnets were dedicated to Henry Wriothesley, you've got to ask, why was Shakespeare writing love poem to the 4th Earl of Southampton? It's a bit clearer when you consider that it was probably, well, if the Prince Tudor thing is right, then it was Edward de Vere was writing love poems to his son, and it becomes a bit more platonic love. I mean, I'm not, you know.
Okay. I thought it was another case of mother and son, you know.
Yeah, well, who knows? I wouldn't rule it out, or any permutation and combination you care to think of. I don't think they'd have been beneath that. So we've got Henry Wriothesley and Robert Devereux riding into town. They try and kill Robert Cecil. Basically, that's the mission, is to kill Robert Cecil, get him away from Queen Elizabeth so that they can start advising her about the succession. Now, if you look at Robert Devereux, he was sort of an aquiline, ginger guy, and he did seem to think he had some right to charge in there and tell the Queen what to do. Now, on what basis was he doing that? It can't have been completely mad, because he had other people with him. So I would say, and other people say, that it's very likely that he was one of Elizabeth's children. He knew it, everyone knew it, but no one mentioned it because she was by that point the Virgin Queen, right? That Cecil had managed that situation like that. So anyway, the Essex Rebellion ended in failure. Everyone who was associated
and wasn't the incited by the play as well by William Shakespeare?
Well, this is the thing. So you've got these two ginger-headed aristocrats leading a rebellion. You had Edward de Vere. Let's just say Shakespeare for the minute, but it was Edward de Vere. At the Globe Theatre, they were paid. I think it was something like 20-something of February 1601. Right, it was the day it happened, the day before the Essex Rebellion kicked off. The Globe Theatre players were paid to put on the play Richard II, which in the version they put on includes what's called the deposition scene. So the deposition scene in Richard II is just sort of like Richard II's a really evil, hunchback, scheming, no good king. And the deposition scene is someone just saying, well, you're a bad king for this reason, you're a bad king for this reason, you're bad. So we're justified in getting rid of you. So in a public performance, in a public space, they were justifying rebellion. And that deposition scene was very, 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 very contentious. It'd been taken out of previous performances. I think the records say that the Globe players were paid extra to put that scene in. And it caused a tumult because everyone in the audience recognised Richard II's this nasty, diminutive, hunchback guy who does nothing but plot and scheme and backstab people. And then the audience knew this wasn't Richard II being depicted, it was Robert Cecil, who was a short, hunchback guy who loved to plot and scheme. And so it became very clear, and there were seditious outcries from the audience during this performance, like people say, let's go kill Cecil, whatever. Probably some people in there, like agent provocateuring, other people just getting whipped up in the frenzy. And anyway, that performance of Richard II caused a crowd to foment. That crowd were used as part of, sort of followed Robert Devereux and his rebellion as they rode into town. And it became quite obvious that Shakespeare and Shakespeare's Globe, that premier bit of propaganda, had been used to identify and vilify Robert Cecil. So many people died at his hand, it's beyond counting. He was not to be messed with, right? He believed he was acting with the divine sort of power of the whole government. He was acting on behalf of the monarch to do the monarch's bidding. Rules didn't really apply to him. So why did he let Shakespeare off? I mean, Shakespeare's just this guy who writes good poetry, right? And he wrote something about Robert Cecil. He wrote a satire directed at Robert Cecil. Only a blind man would miss the associations. And for some reason, no one's able to explain, because poets and writers would get thrown in jail. Ben Jonson ended up in jail for saying something a bit rude about someone minor. In Richard II, Shakespeare calls for the deposition, calls for the death, really, of Robert Cecil, the Queen's chief minister. People try and say, oh, well, that can't have happened. This is the historical record. People mention this controversial staging of Richard II. They mention the fact that the people got whipped up into a frenzy and that they were all part of the Essex Rebellion. You got loads of people saying it. So Shakespeare, whoever Shakespeare was, almost helped foment an almost successful rebellion to change the destiny of the country. So it seems really unlikely that he was just a bloke from Stratford who couldn't sign his name, who didn't own any books, and so on and so on. He was a political actor. Again, there are several aristocrats, ginger-haired, who had, it seems, very strong opinions about what should happen after Queen Elizabeth died, right? And Robert Cecil made it his business to put all of those people down and squash them.
So yeah, conclusion basically, Shakespeare is essentially been handed all these plays, and he himself is kind of just a public puppet.
Yeah, someone compared him to, they called him our English Terence. Now, Terence was a slave in Rome who claimed he wrote loads of plays, and I think it was for he did it for someone. So it's basically an actor pretending to be a playwright, and it seems like exactly what William Shakespeare was.
You still see the same thing today, like the kind of engineering of society through movies. One of the best examples is like the Transformers movies. On the surface, it's just it's kids' movies. It's better Transformers, but it was actually part funded by the U.S. military. They allowed them to use U.S. military stuff to get kids to sign up for the military, I'm going to fight some Transformers.
Yeah. Yeah.
But when you find out stuff like that, and you think, oh shit, obviously
No,
it's happening. This, there is probably a room somewhere where people sit there going, right, let's make a movie about this because we want the public's, to be engineered
attention
towards that.
focused in that direction. Yeah. No,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, or on a certain subject. Like, I mean, I don't want to obviously talk about it, but a lot of political stuff is obviously entering into, very woke kind of stuff is entering into media now, and you see the agenda, don't you? Like, put into everything, and it's like it pushes, like you say, an agenda is pushing what they want people to talk about and to think and stuff like that. Do you know what I mean?
Oh no, definitely. I mean, there are all kinds of ways of looking at it. I'm absolutely committed to equality, right? But
Yeah.
there are these very, very, very small groups, who get a disproportionate amount of coverage. And I'd say, let's say, into the battle of the sexes, however you want to put that, that involves 50% or 100% the population of the world, right? Racial equality, economic equality, these sort of things affect everyone, but we don't talk about them. We talk about very, very marginal things that get pushed right front. That's
100%. The next topic is Guy Fawkes. This is probably one of the biggest public engineerings of the time, isn't it?
Well, this is Robert Cecil's, if you like, masterpiece, or you could say his downfall. This was a hell of a bit of work. What's interesting in terms of sort of the stories being interconnected is two members of the Essex Rebellion, Robert Catesby and Thomas Percy, ended up being the main plotters of the gunpowder plot. And it is quite an interesting story as to why. Again, in my book, Architecture of Power, I mentioned this as a kind of a way of just demonstrating how holy British history is. There are a lot of stories we get told that do not stand up to scrutiny. Now, the scrutiny the Guy Fawkes story has been put under was in this book by a guy called Francis Edwards. Now, Francis Edwards was a Jesuit archivist. So he's a very religious man, Catholic, very studied. The Jesuits have got all kinds of techniques, I'm going to say, that they use. Very sophisticated people, the Jesuits. And he was an archivist, so he went through their archive looking at the paperwork for that era, all the letters and all the different correspondence and records from that era. And what's clear from the handwritten letters of some of the Jesuits that were around at the time of the Guy Fawkes, the gunpowder plot happened in 1605, the story we get is nonsense. And it's relatively easy to go through it. So all the Essex Rebellion people were caught, some were executed, some were let off scot-free, and somewhere in the middle were Thomas Percy and Robert Catesby, who were let off with a fine. But almost immediately after they were let out, they were released, they started running around very loudly trying to recruit disenfranchised, pissed off Catholics, people who weren't happy with the whole current political situation. They were saying that when James I came, because he hadn't yet taken the crown, this was in the run-up to, he took the crown in 1603, this would have been in 1602, say, he's going to come down here, he's going to squash us Catholics, he's anti-Catholic, he hates us. And they were just trying to, they went around certain areas and that were known to be of Catholic-leaning areas and try and see who they could recruit. Now, the phrase I heard, which I thought was quite nice to describe this technique, was you use tame geese to attract wild ducks. So you got these tame geese, these two guys, Catesby and Percy, going around, just shouting and causing a bit of a ruckus and just seeing who responds and how. And anyone who's sort of up for let's do something dramatically pro-Catholic, they go, all right, yeah, let's go. And they recruit on that basis. And they recruited especially around families, Catholic gentry, that lived around and were known to the Percy family, which is one of the oldest and most powerful families, the Dukes of Northumbria, who the Duke of Northumbria at that time was a dyed-in-the-wool Catholic and hated Robert Cecil. There was absolute no love lost between the two. So Robert Cecil's agents went around and recruited Catholics from families associated with his rival at court, the Duke of Northumbria, who's also named Percy. He recruited Thomas Percy. He was a minor gentry kind of guy. He wasn't anything big, but having that name Percy was very helpful to Robert Cecil because he could associate by implication. If there was a Percy going around recruiting Catholics to blow up King James, well, how would the biggest Percy of them all not be involved, right? it's sneakier than that, because Thomas Percy, on the day of the gunpowder plot was meant to happen, he went uninvited to visit the Duke of Northumbria, whose surname was also Percy, in his castle in Brentford, a place called Zion House. It's a beautiful place owned by the Earl of Northumbria, right in the middle of West London. So Robert Cecil got Thomas Percy, recruited him, and used him as a way of implicating the Duke of Northumbria, who's his rival. They also went around and recruited loads of other people that they could find who were kind of probably going to cause trouble anyway, let's say. So you get them all under one roof. The other thing, and this is where Francis Edwards' side of the story comes in, the other thing that they, Catesby and Percy, did was they confessed to absolutely everyone they could. So they find any Catholic priest, any Jesuit especially, and they say, look, I need to talk to you. And then they confess, we're going to blow up the House of Parliament, we're going to kill the king. This is where the documents come in, because these Jesuits who got confessed to were like, because we cannot, they swore an oath, they cannot break confession, right? So they can't tell anyone, and they're trapped. So the only thing they can do is confess to other members of their order. So they all do that. They all can't start telling each other. In the end, it ended up with a guy, I think he might have been the chief Jesuit. It was all very cloak and dagger being a Jesuit in England at the time. But a guy called Henry Garnet found out about what they were plotting, and they all knew it was mad. They all knew it wasn't going to work. And even if it did work, all it would do would bring fury down on the Catholics. As deeply, deeply, deeply pro-Catholic people, these Jesuits knew that this plot was bonkers. So Henry Garnet wrote a letter to Rome and basically arranged for the Pope to make a declaration saying it is illegal for any good Catholic to attack or harm their lawful king. Thereby, without naming any names, the Pope intervened to try and stop the gunpowder plot. And again, that's all a matter of record. You know, these things got written down. Obviously, Catesby and Percy ignore all that and crack on. So the sort of November the 5th thing with the whole Guy Fawkes. Guy Fawkes was a fairly minor member of the gang. They didn't really know him very well. I should say the house, presumably everyone knows the story, they dug a tunnel and took loads of gunpowder under Parliament, right? The house that they were using belonged to a guy called Dudley Carleton, who was one of Robert Cecil's best friends. When the plot blew up, no one shot Dudley Carleton's head off. He was made an ambassador and he was promoted. So it's a strange coincidence, at the very least, that one of Robert Cecil's closest confidants supplied the house that allowed the plot to happen, right? He probably made money out of it. They were paying him rent, you know. Why not make money at the same time? Anyway, when Guy Fawkes was there in situ with the gunpowder, that's November 5th, right? Famously, November 5th, remember. But a few days before that, Robert Cecil had actually received a letter, cut a long story short, saying that something deadly is going to happen under Parliament and that you shouldn't go. Don't go. There's going to be a great blow to Parliament. Stay away, was this letter. So this letter that Francis Edwards says was a forgery, that Robert Cecil had delivered to him in the middle of a meeting where other people were there, so he could read it out and be all surprised by it, like, oh, what should we do? That was about a week before November the 5th, and he did nothing. Nothing happened until November 5th, when the gunpowder was in place, when all the bits, if you like, of the chessboard were in the right order. He had over a week's notice that something was going to happen, but ordered no searches, didn't act in any way until the time was right. So it was very good timing on his part. So let's just go with Guy Fawkes for a minute. He was arrested on the 5th. I can't imagine the pain and stress he was put under. And after about a week, he started giving names, including Catesby and Percy and other sort of bigger names that were involved, after about a week. So that would have been like, what, the 12th, 11th, 12th of November, something like that, he broke.
Also, before we continue, can you just talk quickly about where they got the gunpowder from?
Obviously gunpowder, having 36 barrels of gunpowder in London was about I'd say 36 nuclear missiles nowadays. I mean, people keep an eye on gunpowder, right? Gunpowder was by law kept in the Tower of London, in the basement, well out of harm's way. Really interestingly, again, a bit like Shakespeare's school records, all the records for the gunpowder in that period all disappear. So for a few weeks before and a few weeks after, there's no records of who's been keeping the gunpowder where. So it's quite likely what they got was sort of national ordnance gunpowder, maybe diluted a bit, mixed with something else, so it wasn't quite as pokey. 36 barrels, can you imagine, of gunpowder when, having a flask of it meant you needed all kinds of written permissions. There's just no way was incredibly implausible. No one can come up with a plausible explanation for where they got 36 barrels from. It seems most likely that they, quote unquote, borrowed it, or it was lent to them from the national store and then put back, or something like that.
Like you said, there's no other way to get it, so it seems most likely they've got it from the people they're saying they're going to go and bomb.
Yeah, but without that, I mean, it would have been done once or twice removed, and they, for all I'd imagine, knowing how sneaky they all were, Robert Cecil made them pay someone loads of money for the dodgy gunpowder that he was going to trap them with. You know what I mean? Why not make money out of the people you're going to?
So this could be like the first false flag in British history, or is there a few before this?
I imagine in false flag school, this is chapter 1. This is how you do it.
So yeah, you were talking about the names, about Guy Fawkes and his names, getting tortured for the names.
Thank you. Yeah. So basically, Guy Fawkes held out for about a week. So again, that makes it to the 11th, 12th, something like that, maybe the 10th. I don't know. But he held out a long time before he gave any names or any details. What's remarkable is on the 8th of November, all the gunpowder plotters blew themselves up. On the 8th of November, the remaining plotters all agreed to meet at a place called Holbecker House, which is about 120 miles out of London in the northwest. And Thomas Percy suggested they all get together in a barn sort of thing and have a meeting and discuss what they were going to do. So he very kindly put out some benches and put out a barrel in the middle of this room. And on this barrel, he put a metal plate. And on the metal plate, he put a brazier, like a little fire. And there was like holes in this metal plate, witnesses said. So they all get in there, all the gunpowder plotters. There's about 30 or 40 of them there. They're all aware that Guy Fawkes has been arrested. That's why they've gone to Holbecker House. But they're all trying to lay low, right? And discuss what they're going to do. So they're all in the room. And then Thomas Percy says, hang on, mate. Hang on, lads. I'll go and get us some nice hot drinks. So he goes out and gets them some nice hot drinks. And then someone, while they're waiting, stands up and pokes at the brazier on top of the barrel. What Thomas Percy had forgotten to tell all his friends is in the barrel, he'd placed 2 16-pound bags of gunpowder. And this is about to be the only explosion that's ever happens to do with the gunpowder plot. Someone pokes the brazier, a bit of fire goes down into the barrel and it blows up. Only one of the 2 bags ignited, apparently, but everyone in the room, the roof was literally blown off. Everyone in the room had their eyebrows and so on singed. They must have gone deaf for a good half an hour or whatever. You got that ringing in your ears from the explosion. They're all completely disorientated. Unluckily for them, there so happened to be 300 troops, something to do, I think, with the Sheriff of Worcester, happened to be just down the road when this huge explosion happened. And they were like, golly, I wonder if that's got anything to do with the gunpowder plot that Robert Cecil's just discovered in London. And they trotted over and they found, lo and behold, they discovered all the gunpowder plotters. And as you can imagine, a lot of this...
They all survived?
No, unfortunately for them. Some of them tried to give themselves up and were arrested. Others, like Catesby and Percy, were on their knees and they were both killed by the same bullet. Robert Cecil paid the man who killed them a pension of 40 shillings a year for the rest of his life to say thank you. It's very likely that they thought they were surrendering to their boss, right? Nudge, nudge, wink, wink, with, because they were, certainly Thomas Percy at that time, was clearly acting in somebody's interest that wasn't his co-conspirators, right? He blew them up. Anyway, Catesby and Percy shot by the same bullet. It's an execution. And that, by doing that, Robert Cecil made sure no one would ever know, or so he thought, no one would ever know what he got up to. Catesby and Percy are killed. Some of the others are killed, and some of them are taken to court. And it was a very famous lawyer called Coke, who was the Attorney General, I think, at the time, who prosecuted them. It's in the court case, you get a lot of this detail. For example, he said, it was lucky that the second bag of gunpowder didn't blow up, because if it had, all of the defendants before us would never have lived to stand trial. On trial for treason, that meant they had no defence. They just heard the evidence and then got executed. Guy Fawkes famously didn't wait to be hung, drawn and quartered, didn't wait for any of that to happen. He jumped off the scaffold or whatever and broke his own neck because he knew what was coming. Yeah.
I didn't know that, I always presumed they burned them at the stake because that's what,
No, it would have been like, the standard for treason was hanging, drawing and quartering, and that could last a couple of hours. I think they really knew what they were doing in terms of keeping someone alive and making the biggest possible spectacle of what will happen to a person if they're treasonous. And he saved himself from that. But again, in that, I think it was Edward Coke, Sir Edward Coke, the lawyer's name. He was quite famous and became even more famous, actually. Great lawyer, and at that time, a loyal servant of Cecil's. Later on, there was his career moved on, and he wasn't so friendly with Cecil, mainly because Cecil, pretty much after this 1605 and the kind of aftermath where he did manage to take control, did manage to persuade the king, was in a powerful position for a while, it soon faded. If you like, that was the zenith of his political career, because people all over the place were like, this is bullshit, right? And written down by the Earl of Gloucester, quite an establishment figure and not someone who you could easily ignore in medieval England. Bishop of Gloucester, quite a big figure. He said Robert Cecil was in the habit of first contriving and then discovering a treason. And he said that on record. It's written down. You can read it today.
So the guy's he's had a habit for it.
I mean, the Bishop of Gloucester's outing you and you haven't managed to shut him up. Imagine who else is who's noticed that these guys who were in your employ have suddenly done this crazy thing, and lo and behold, you look like Golden Bottom. Like, it was just...
He's just a snake, isn't he?
It was very, very... I mean, you know, we still celebrate it. You won't hear this on the BBC. Robert Cecil, in certain terms, is still defining our understanding of ourselves today.
This is the guy that the play that we were talking about before was about, this Robert Cecil bloke.
The play, Richard II, yeah.
The shit, yeah. So it's about this evil conniving man, and look, he goes and does some more evil conniving stuff. So that's right on brand, isn't it?
You think I'm bad? Wait until you see this, right? I mean,
it
was. I mean, he was playing for the highest possible stakes, but
Guy Fawkes is just a patsy. That is a scapegoat.
He's no one. He's a nothing to the whole situation.
And and we would all think the way it's taught to us is that Guy Fawkes was the mastermind, that he hated the king, and he just got all these people together to blow up Parliament.
Yeah, just mad evil Catholics, right? Robert Cecil did all that to try and influence James I, James Stuart. James Stuart came down, became the King of England. This is an area I know a lot about. James Stuart espoused the divine right form of kingship. His family, the Stuart family, were deeply connected to the French aristocracy, the Bourbons, which is just another way of saying the Medicis. But the Bourbon royal family, the Louis XIV, Louis XIII before that, height of their power, very, very, very influential family, and very much married into the Stuart family. James Stuart's mum was Mary Queen of Scots, grew up in France, and she actually changed the spelling of their name. Stuart, the royal family name, in England was Stuart. That's the French spelling of Stuart, because she didn't like the Scottish spelling, which is EW, Stewart. So they even changed their name to be more French, the Stuarts. They loved the French. So when James I came down to London and Robert Cecil had just did all his Guy Fawkes manoeuvres, James I had another source of intelligence, let's say, another power base, and that was the Bourbons and the French connection. It's very hard to say exactly what happened, but when Robert Cecil died, no one mourned him. And he died very, very young in 1612. So he was in his 40s. And he
not young enough, it sounds like.
Well, yeah, but and that was definitely how the Jesuits felt about it. So Henry Garnet, I should have said, the guy who wrote a letter arranging for the Pope to say, don't get involved in attacks on the king, guy who did absolutely everything he could to stop the gunpowder plot, was arrested by Robert Cecil because he knew that Catesby and Percy had confessed to him, and he was hung, drawn and quartered. This Jesuit priest was tortured for hours and then put to death.
And then, of course, because of this, he then had the power to go and get all the priests that had been confessed to, right? And start carting them off. So anybody that had been told about
Catesby and Percy had told everyone they could, and then all of those people got arrested by Cecil.
They're not supposed to be allowed to share confessions, but they can share it with each other, correct? So they obviously were talking to each other.
Yeah.
And they're all going, fuck, we need to stop this, but we can't because we can't say anything. And then obviously at the end, they turns around and he says, so you guys knew? And they go, well, yeah, we did know, but we're bound by God to not say anything. He goes, right, come with me.
Yeah, and like literally they went out their way. They got the Pope to intervene. And we certainly never taught that at school. I mean, the Jesuits and the Catholics went out of their way to try and stop what was obviously a batshit crazy plan. Most people aren't up for blowing things up because they're angry, thankfully. Otherwise, we'd all fucking be dead, wouldn't we?
It's a false flag, isn't it? To completely convince people that the Catholics have tried to... Because obviously, people in America might not know, because I know big part of my audience are American, but they will have heard of, Catholic v Protestant. And in Britain at one point, that was, a huge deal. It was a huge deal in Ireland as well.
Yeah.
Still is in some parts. Some people won't want you marrying a Catholic if you're a Protestant. Still
All
to
right,
this
yeah.
day.
Yeah.
Or even Church of England, they'll still, my granny can be a bit like, ooh, not a Catholic. And it's like, come on, chill, granny.
Wow.
But it just shows because it's so ingrained. But
Yeah.
at a point, like you say, when political tensions are high and you've got this Protestant versus Catholic, this guy is capitalized on that and gone, right, I'm going to paint these Catholics as terrorists and turn the king against the Catholics, give
Yes.
me a remit to murder all these Catholics that knew about it.
And confiscate their property. Because you can't be letting Catholics all these big, rich Catholics need punishing.
Take away their churches, exactly.
Yes.
And now you've also kind of solidified your rule, because if you've got control over the Church of England, the Protestant side of it, you've got no other voice. You've not got a Catholic voice anymore because you've got rid of it all. So there's no counterpoint.
You imagine the fervor, that he whipped up with this plot meant that Protestants all over the place went and beat up their local Catholics, right? People were victimized left, right, and center, and he'd have been slow to try and stop people acting that way, at the very least. And it's just a despicable abuse of power. Well, for reasons that are very easy to understand, we don't get taught that this is what happened. We get taught the official false flag narrative, even though, 418 years later, this is the problem in England. And I mean, America, you say you have an audience in America, they don't have the same type of problems, but they don't have the same depth, because we've just got more of them. Do you know what I mean? We've got a longer history of being bullshitted by our Tory government. And I'd say the Tory thing in England also translates to the States, because there are lots of people in America who, after the War of Independence was lost, still preferred Britain, still preferred inequality, still preferred aristocracy. And if they could, they'd have turned America back into a monarchy as soon as they could. And they've been trying, some of them, ever since. The Tories exist on both sides of the Atlantic. It's an international bunch of cunts.
And I was going to say, of course, when we were talking about James II, the one that was running around the fires, New York named after this evil tyrant, really, that probably caused a lot of problems. But I mean, then again, they did kill his father, so maybe there's a bit of a you kind of understand his villain origin story, don't you?
There is a plausible backstory. I don't know if it justifies burning down a whole town. I mean, James II.
You kind of get it, do you? Like, they killed his daddy.
I forgive him his anger. Was it people hurt people, don't they? And he was
exactly.
He was hurt.
So he just needed a hug. Oh yeah. We should have just shipped him off to France with his dad, and it would have been no issue. They would have been like, "Should we go back to England?" His dad would be like, "Nah, it's fine."
No. I mean, in some ways, I think they were quite gutted they had to come back to England, because having lived, the life of an aristocrat in France, being a king of England was pretty poor in comparison.
Pretty rainy.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. the Stuarts, there were four of them: James I, Charles I, Charles II, James II. All four of those guys were disasters. All four of them. I mean, all just in their own ways. They were.
And then I guess that leads us then into our final topic, which is William of Orange and the Bank of England origins.
Yeah,
and
that's lovely. Yeah,
how Britain conquers the world through their banking.
It's such a happy. It's like, the thing is, again, in my book, I point out you got the Whigs versus the Tories, and this is not, the Jedi versus the Sith. There's no good guys here. It's just two
Sith versus Sith. Yeah,
it's a Sith on Sith. I don't know. It's just powerful people. I mean, it goes nicely, because after the four Stuart kings, after James II especially, the people that own and run this country, the City of London, the banking, the corporations, were just like, now forget this. We cannot carry on like this. This is mental. James II was a Catholic. He was introducing all kinds of innovations to England, and he was going to try and turn the country Catholic again. So that story that, the 1605 Guy Fawkes stuff, it could have been that England became again a Catholic country and was run by the Bourbons. Life across the world would have been very different. What happened, however, was that what we call the Glorious Revolution, which was pretty much immediately in 1685 when James II became king. People were like, "No, we can't have this guy's mental." And he did all kinds of things that were very provocative. He had, for the first time in English history, he employed an army just to sit around. And they sat around about a day's march from the City of London on what's called Hounslow Heath. 20,000 men armed to the teeth and out a day's march from London. Nothing like that had ever happened before. Kings of England only ever sort of put armies together when they needed them. He just had a standing army, and that caused people in that House of Commons to openly shit themselves. They were like, this has never happened before. He's a Catholic king with Catholic officers. It wound them up because they knew he was after them. If he could have, the moment he was crowned, he would have taken on the city, taken on Parliament and shut them down, because that was really what he was about. So to prevent that happening, the City of London and some MPs invited William of Orange, who was married to James's daughter, Mary. William and Mary were the rulers of Holland, the Dutch Republic. The names all mean slightly different things, but they were the chiefs of the House of Orange, and they were invited and did come to Britain. And very sneakily, I think, or very politically, William of Orange landed on the south coast on the 5th of November. He did that because the 5th of November is the day everyone in England celebrated the triumph of Protestantism over the evil Catholics. And the king at the time was an evil Catholic, and William of Orange was, styling himself, positioning himself as the Protestant saviour. Now, James II has lots of reasons for being famous. No one knows that he rescued arsonists during the Fire of London, but everyone knows the Grand Old Duke of York, he had 10,000 men, right? That was a song. Lyrics were written in commemoration of James II, because what he tried to do was he rode out of London with his 10,000 men, his army. He got to Salisbury Plain. Meanwhile, William of Orange is marching his much smaller force to meet them. And overnight, James's forces just disperse. They just disappear. Over 80% of the army go AWOL. John Churchill, who's the ancestor of, famous Churchill, was the head of the army at the time. He changed sides. He was serving James, and overnight he said, no, I'm not doing this. And he stayed neutral for just enough time and then joined in William of Orange's team. And it was actually very successful under William of Orange in the continent. James's army moved in to meet William's. James's army dispersed. James started having chronic nosebleeds and sort of panic attacks. Apparently, when people saw him over the next few days, he just looked very weird. I think he was probably dosed up to his eyeballs by his doctors just to try and keep him calm. Apparently about this time, because he believed in divine right. He believed God had made him king. So he believed God was punishing him. This was God's punishment. That's the only explanation, because he's God's representative on earth and suddenly he's up shit creek. So God must be punishing him. He started wondering which woman it was who he'd shagged, or what, person he'd been rude to at some point that had made God so angry with him. He became irrational, was taken back to London, tried to escape, was captured and brought back to London again. And all the time, William is making a very sort of slow approach to London. And it was kind of embarrassing, because William didn't want to arrive in London with James there, because then there'd be two kings. And that's kind of like been embarrassing for both of them. So James was persuaded to, I think it was the 11th of December, 1688, James Scarp had left Whitehall and allegedly threw the royal seal into the Thames, and everyone said they saw him do it, which was their way of saying, yeah, he definitely abdicated, so it was all legal. So James left and William of Orange was installed. William of Orange was involved in an international war, really, against the Bourbon family in France. France and Holland were at war all the time. In the colonies all the way around the world, they were vying for control of all the valuable trade. And Britain, immediately, having had all the Stuarts involved and running things, the moment William of Orange came over and became king here, we naturally became allies of the Dutch, and we started being more aggressive towards the French. And we want to be at war with France all across the world. We want to be dominating the world. We need a big navy, right? We're going to take over the world. We need a bigger navy. So how do we pay for a bigger navy? Some friends or some fellow travellers of William's go, oh, we've got a brilliant idea. We're going to make the Bank of England. That's the origins of the Bank of England. The Bank of England was set up to finance the building of a navy. That navy would then protect trade, which is, a euphemism for theft most of the time. Therefore, we'd be able to get the money back and the whole virtuous circle of economic growth would happen. But as you might expect, bankers are clever. You could subscribe, any one person could pay in up to a £10,000 stake. That was the official thing. So lots of different people paid in their
They needed 1.2 million they wanted to raise.
So they raised about $1 million in. I'm going just to make the maths a bit easier. I'm going to stick to round figures, if you don't mind. But it's the margin of error is fairly small. Say they raise £1 million. So they've got that £1 million cash, so they print £10 million worth of notes. They charge 8% interest on those notes. So that's in the first year back, you need £800,000. On that £10 million of notes, that's the interest. So you then got £800,000 of interest coming in your first year on £1 million deposit. So they're making a lot of money, and they're doing it by printing paper. They just say, yeah, this is a Bank of England note. It's worth this because it says so on the tin. Before, to raise money to buy things for the Navy, they'd have actually had to have gold or silver. Now they're doing it with bits of paper. So there's a huge explosion in what they call liquidity. Everyone could just start buying everything. And that was the origins of the Bank of England. The cycle, if you like, of trade and growth began with the companies going out with their loans, and they'd have to bring back, if you like, they were given cash and they had to bring back to the altar that was the City of London more than they'd been given. That was the absolute test. You had to be able to bring back more than you'd been given. You have to be able to pay interest. And by doing that on a cyclical basis, all over the world, everyone going around. There's a lovely article about Goldman Sachs, and someone described them, I think it's a vampire squid. So a thing that can take any shape. It sees a little nick and cranny somewhere where there might be a shrimp or something. Vampire squid can go in and suck out the nutrients from the... So the City of London, like that, puts out its tentacles, goes around and finds where there's good stuff to be had. They take all the furs from North America, start getting interested in gold later on in South Africa and in South America. They just go out and look for the good stuff and try and bring it home. And the Bank of England really was the principal engine of that growth. There were a couple of other national banks. I think the Swedish had one, but it enabled Britain to kickstart its economy. Most importantly, it allowed it to buy, build and pay for naval ships. The British Navy started becoming a thing.
And of course, it's a private company, so all that interest was going to private people.
Yeah, so the Bank of England, with it's like that with the Federal Reserve in America. It's about as federal as Federal Express. I like that analogy because just because you call it the Bank of England, the mentality, you go out around the world and you're literally like a dog sniffing for a scent. What you're looking for is any sign of wealth anywhere, and then you steal it as quickly and as cheaply as possible.
Sorry, I was going to say, people won't realize that the founding fathers originally, they wanted to have it in the constitution that banks could not exist because private banking was bad, and that the official line was that basically future generations should not be saddled with the debts of past generations, and we just can't go like that. And Alexander Hamilton was the one that was funded by the Rothschilds to basically push the whole, let's do it banking style. And look how it turns out. He gets himself a play on Broadway, doesn't he, with rap music and all that.
Somehow he's a cool guy now. Yeah, but
because he backed the bankers.
The way Abraham Lincoln and JFK tried to run the American economy was a much kinder, much fairer way of doing things. I know it's fashionable to say, let's say that all politicians are as bad, but actually I can't agree with that. I mean, I would say, like you said, just about the founding fathers, they were what I would call, in those terms, they would have identified broadly as Whigs and probably been Irish right Freemasons. They believed and practiced equality as quite a fundamental part of their value system. And it was that sense of equality, although I know it was among white men who owned property, but even that was radical, right? Those people, those Whigs, were trying to make life more equal because that's what they believed was, if you like, God's plan, however you want to put it. And the Tories wanted the pyramid. They wanted it the same as they claimed as it had always been, with Pharaoh on top, his advisors, and then, a million minions underneath.
Which is how we have it today.
Well, yeah. I mean, very much in this country, after the English Civil War, we basically, and especially after the Restoration, we kind of reverted to an aristocracy, and slowly but surely the Tories have taken over. So there aren't really any Whigs in this country anymore. There are only Tories. All the Whigs went to America, and that's where you get the greater sense of people being equal. Their version of equality wasn't exactly all-inclusive at the time, but for some of them it was. Some of them were like, no, slavery is shit because these people are human beings. They're not the people who won the argument for a long time, but they were there. And it's that value system that I'd contrast with the Tories, who are the people who are no different to the Gulf state aristocrats or the despots in China or Russia.
And when they brought in this, the original banking, wasn't it a tax on wine that they used to pay that interest?
Oh, originally? Yeah, now you're taxing my memory. Yeah, that's no. what it was, sorry, this is another cute thing. Like the Federal Reserve apparently was, they snuck it in. Like in 1912, it was like Christmas Eve or something like that. And everyone had gone home except for 10 guys who had agreed to stay behind but not tell anyone. Those 10 guys were the guys who voted in the Federal Reserve Act. It's something very much like that. It was very done under the radar sneakily. It was the same with the Bank of England, because the Tonnage Act was a yearly act that Parliament passed to regulate the tax on wine. Generally, apparently, it was a good day to be a parliamentarian, because all the wine merchants would be there trying to persuade you with wine not to put the taxes up too much. So it was generally understood to be a bit of not a holiday, but a piss up. And at the bottom of the Tonnage Act, there was a paragraph, maybe 50 words, maybe less, that said we're going to set up a Bank of England. Really simple, really plain text. Got voted in at the same time as the wine tax did. Everyone probably went off and got pissed, and only a few people realised quite what had happened. Very well orchestrated, subtle, with a long-term vision of how to rule the world.
And when they loaned the money out, didn't they obviously request that people paid it back with physical stuff, because there wasn't enough? There wasn't enough, obviously, notes to pay back your interest. So they're like, well, give us your gold. Come on, give us your stuff.
So literally you print these paper notes. There's not enough paper notes to pay everything back with interest. So the interest somewhere, £800,000 in gold, like all silver, but I think mainly gold, got back to the Bank of England in its first year. So they'd almost doubled.
So trading paper for gold. Wow. They figured it out. Well, all the Chinese were working on what we talked about, the Chinese trying to get that philosopher's stone so they could turn anything to gold. They did it. With banking.
And patriotism, because it was a terribly patriotic. Get your money in the Bank of England. It's going to help the Navy. We'll beat the French. It was all of that. They were, harnessing. And
Bank of England set up by a Dutchman, owned by private people.
Yes, get stuck in, like, I guess, commodifying identity. Isn't it? Well, it's power politics. It's commodifying the British sense of identity, and we'll go and smash the world. And
and hundreds of years later, here they are fucking the economy still.
Yeah, well, they're doing. I mean? Someone said recently, isn't it a shame isn't it interesting? The British are finally finding out what it's like to be run by the British, because the people that run this country have run out of other things to steal from other people, so they're stealing everything from us. In my lifetime, we used to own the water companies. They're all owned by sovereign wealth funds. The electricity, don't own that. We pay more for our power, like 2 or 3 times what they pay in France. Our food shopping is ridiculous expensive when you compare it. That's why Lidl, Lidl. You go, I've got Lidl just down the road from me. Everything's about 25% cheaper because they just don't profit gouge us, right? In Germany, 5% profit is seen as acceptable. Over here, it's more like 15%. So Tesco's, Morrison's, all of that, they're used to screwing us over because we don't know any different. And it just goes all the way down the line. And these people who really since 1066 have been running this island like a business are running out of time, and it's likely that it's going to get worse, I think, before it gets better.
People don't realize that, like you said, like they've run out of stuff and they're looking for anything they can, anything that isn't nailed down, which is exactly why they've got this whole councils going bust, because the councils then go bankrupt. So they start looking at, well, what does the council own? Oh, you've got a nice shiny building there. That's a nice shiny building. Whoa, we need that to do council stuff. No, we can sell that. We'll have that. We'll sell it to a company. And that's how, a bank will buy the mayor's building or something.
For pennies on the pound. For like,
exactly.
You're worth 100 million quid and they'll end up spending.
Yeah, they'll pay fuck all. So the Tories will be coming in laughing, sweeping everything off the streets, going, that's ours. We've got to collect the debt. It's your governor's fault for not doing it.
It's disaster capitalism. They're literally going around kicking every tree and seeing what falls out of it. They'll literally break things to salvage the parts. One example of how far everything in Britain has been sold off that really stuck with me is the HMRC building, the tax office building in town. 10 years ago now, they sold it for 400 million quid. So they got paid 400 million quid by a company based in the Cayman Islands. And they now pay 250 million quid, I think, or at the time these figures were right, 250 million quid a year in rent to a landlord who doesn't pay tax.
Incredible.
The HMRC, Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, landlord is a tax avoider by design.
That's a joke, isn't it?
It's
Yeah, well,
I mean,
you couldn't
like,
write
I
it.
really resent like paying any tax when they let their landlord. You know, they come after me for pennies in the pound, or
Oh yeah, yeah. If you
know what
don't,
I mean?
if you don't pay your tax, they'll come for you. But it's like the trains, like you're talking about companies, we used to own and stuff. The trains, three different companies, well, three types of companies, if you own the trains. So you've got like National Rail that actually own all the stations and the actual railways. So National Rail own that and they're private.
Yeah.
Then you've got a company that own the right to run the lines. So there's your second company coming. So like your Virgin, your Avanti West Coast, they're the second. But then they rent the trains off a third company that owns all the trains. Like what? It's ridiculous, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, but it makes a lot of middle managers rich, however you want to put it. And it's literally Thatcher since 1979 said, "Well, look, we're not going to manufacture anything anymore," because the thing was, like the coal mines, all those coal miners working together, they had a sense of community. All people who worked in a factory had a shared identity, and so that it made for social organisation. It made for people who were capable and willing to stand up for their rights. And the ruling class in this country were like, fuck that. We'd rather be poorer as a country, as a nation we'll be poorer, but at least the old pyramid will be able to reimpose the inequality. We'd rather do that than have a richer country. And that's literally the decision they made. They decided to sell things off and impoverish more of the population to maintain their control on things, because it's either that or they might have to share.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Everyone be better off. Everyone have better living standards. I mean, it's horrible. But 15 years ago, the National Health Service, this might annoy some Americans, but we get it for half the price you guys get it. We get twice the level of service. It's universal and it's free. It's not perfect, but the outcomes from the National Health Service surpass anything done in the private sector anywhere else in the world. And the private sector know it. So when Bernie Sanders in America or someone in America goes, look at that National Health Service, we can all pay a little bit and we'd all get a great service. All the companies in the States are shitting themselves because that would mean they have to sell their super yacht. So the National Health Service...
That's why now the way that they attack it, because they know that we cling on to it so much, so they've attacked it in very subtle ways. Like you say, they've sold off buildings and then had them still rent the building back. Yeah. They've turned around to they've cut the budget funding and said, look, you've got to manage, you've got to put more patients in a room that you can't. When they can afford, like we own the bank. The idea that we would ever run out of money is nonsense. Yes. We actually physically cannot run out of money. We own a bank. We own the means of that production. And it's just...
several people point out, every time there's a war, there's never any shortage of money. It's just when there's poor. And it's by design. I mean, the calorific intake of the average Brit is going down. The consequence of this are well known, is to suppress people. People have less energy. They'll be less able to do anything other than what they're told. It is very deliberate, and it is happening on multiple angles. And I'd say things like the National Health Service, people in Britain still sort of have an association with. They're a problem in practice because they undermine the competition, if you like, because they're so much better than the competition. And they're wrong. They're a problem in principle because they talk about equality. The basis of the National Health Service is that we're all in it together. The Saudi, the Gulf state really don't believe in equality. You've got unbelievable sums of money. I'm going to just say billionaires are buying up assets across the world, and they're not increasing equality anywhere. Right? They're increasing inequality everywhere they go. It's a situation now in Britain is we've basically run out of national assets to sell these people.
I guess it's because people don't realize that things actually are finite. And if you play a game of like Monopoly, right? So let's say if you started a game of Monopoly with me now, then you go, all right, yeah, let's play. But if you came in 5 hours into the game of Monopoly and I'm like, hey, Rob, do you want to join in this game of Monopoly? You sit down and I own everything. You literally can't do anything.
Yeah, no,
because that's the way it is. Yeah, because there's only so many hotels, so many houses you can build in the game. There's only so many spaces.
Yes,
and we have companies which their only job is to grow and to grab. We've got to keep grabbing, keep feeding, got to keep taking. And there's only so much stuff. Yeah, it's going to get to a point where somebody wins and they've got everything, you know, and Jeff Bezos turns around and he literally owns the whole world. And what do we do?
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, I can't help but take it back to, you mentioned Malthusianism a few times before. I mean, it is about management of resources. Malthus said, oh, you know, if the world's population ever hits 1 billion, it's going to be hell on earth. And we've got several billion now. Some people try and say, oh, it's a world population thing, but it's not. I mean, some estimates based on the population density of Holland, I've seen a guy say if given Holland is sustainable, right? Just take that and you blow it up all over the world. You could have 75 billion people. I mean, not you maybe want to, but there's the capacity to sustainably have 75 billion people on this planet. And we're being told that because there's nearly 9, got to turn into Hunger Games.
And a lot of that is because of farming anyway. If we had vertical farming, that would free up so much extra space. Like,
I'm going to say this as well. Like, I mean, beef. I love a bit of beef, but I've got a beef with beef because it's ridiculous. If we got rid of beef, or just said everyone just agreed, everyone said, all right, we'll have beef once a month. You see what that does? Just that one thing. It's totally possible to do. It'd obviously fuck up McDonald's, but hey, I mean, civilization versus McDonald's. You know what I mean? Like a burger is not that important a cultural artifact when you compare it to breathable air or drinkable water, right? And there are things people could do, and it's vested interests. And my catch-all phrase for people who benefit from the fucked up status quo is Tory. That word captures it for me.
Right. Well, anyway, should we wrap up there? I think it's been a great about almost 4 hours. I think we've done in total. But once I cut out all the mistakes and then that first half hour trying to get your computer working, I felt quite old.
I felt quite old trying to work out how to share images yesterday. You handled me very gently. I appreciate that.
Oh, don't worry. And if you release any more books, you know, you come straight back here and show them off. Or if there's anything else you want to talk about, feel free to come on.
Yeah, you know,
about it.
The going forward, because you know I'm part of the Hieroglyphics thing. I mean, if you got a copy of Hieroglyphics, that book that Ross made.
Yeah, I do.
I mean, I can't believe that that's true, but to be fair, it works. And I've shown it to some people who, for example, there's a couple of bookshops where people who are very much into Egyptology work, and they absolutely love the Hieroglyphics book. So, been talking to Ange, Ross's widow, and a couple of other people, including Adam, about how we make sure that book doesn't fade away. And I don't know if you'd have any interest. You could ask Adam to do it, because to be fair, he's very good at all this. But just sharing that maybe one time and showing people, because it really does hold water.
I mean, I've mentioned Hieroglyphics in a lot of my streams already.
We could do, if you're up for it. I mean, for me, it's just it just feels like a bit of a responsibility. There's a lovely community there, and it is an amazing book, and it does distill a lot of Wilson and Blackett down into a very digestible form. And I thought what Ross was doing, taking Wilson and Blackett and trying to, you know, make it a bit more bite-sized, was brilliant. So if you've got any interest in anything in that area, a few things to do. But one thing we are committed to as Britain's Hidden History in some way is just keeping it going. So it'd be great to talk to you about that. Maybe.
Yeah, brilliant. I mean, 100%. And if you know, talk to me whenever you want. Feel free. We'll organise stuff for the future. I'm usually quite slow with my editing, so don't be expecting anything too soon. Marshall and Adam will tell you that. It's just like, you know, it's been 84 years and I've just done nothing. But I will try and get it done as soon as I can. Do you want to say anything to wrap up to the audience? Tell them to buy your book or something? I don't know.
That's a good idea. Right. This is the book, Architecture of Power, Robert Shaw. And I'm very, very proud to be on the Hieroglyphics label. And as we're talking about, being part of what has been labeled Britain's Hidden History Project. And please keep looking out there. Look out for Britain's Hidden History on Facebook and YouTube and all that kind of stuff. There will be more content coming, but we're a do-it-yourself kind of organisation. So if anyone has got any interest in anything we've discussed tonight or about the stuff you've seen on this channel, Luke's channel, about Britain's Hidden History, please get in contact, because we're self-selecting volunteers. There's no membership, there's no funny handshakes.
There's a Facebook group that anyone can go and join.
Yeah,
You have to
Britain,
request access to make sure that you're not a weirdo, but once
yes,
you're in there, you're in.
yeah, Britain's Hidden History Ross, I think it's called.
I'll bring it up on the screen.
Lovely, yeah, thank you. Yeah, but come say hello. We're British history enthusiasts. We're very egalitarian. We're very inclusive, and we like finding out what's really going on.
Yeah, brilliant. And thank you very much for coming and talking for so long. Like, honestly, this has been such a great interview. We've had to cut it. People won't notice because we wore our continuity clothes, but we had to cut this into 2 days. And I'm just very thankful for the amount of time you've given to. You're very patient. You've basically given me about 4 hours or more than 4 hours of your time. So thank you so much for that.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for asking me to come on. Thank you for being such an empathic listener. And thank you. I'm really grateful. It's a funny thing finding out that major bits of your history are fake. And this whole thing with the Great Fire of London, I'd never have imagined it in a million years, but here I am.
Just to summarize some of the stuff, Shakespeare, probably fake. The plague, orchestrated by the royal family, probably to hurt the Londoners. The Great Fire of London, the same thing, organized to destroy London, and also give Sir Christopher Wren the chance to possibly rebuild London in a Baroque architecture, didn't you say, in a grid format? But there was one church, wasn't there, that he had to build a slightly off from where he originally wanted it because somebody refused, wasn't there?
Yeah, that was Hawksmoor in the 1720s,
right.
Yeah, 1715s. Yeah, okay. He tried to put a bit of land in Wapping. They wouldn't sell to him.
Right. Okay. Yeah, and Hawksmoor's church has basically formed the Eye of Horus across London, and that he had some weird Freemasonic reasons for doing that. We're not quite sure his exact intentions, but you've laid out a pretty good idea for what was going on there with the kind of the social infrastructure.
Yeah, it's something about building in to the architecture of town the cycle of boom and bust, the cycle of prosperity, the cycle of growth and decay. That'd be
and the churches themselves kind of resembled the people that he was building it for, didn't they? So if you're a poor person, basically deal with your flat walls and your scary church, But if you're rich, then it's like, come on in, sir. Well, enjoy your
Look at all the nice little ornaments everywhere. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's exactly.
Well, I suppose they probably wouldn't want people sitting down for too long, would they? They say, if we make it a nice church, people will want to hang around. Whereas, we want them to get in, pray, get out, get back to work.
Yes, in the poorer areas, definitely. I mean, you can see all the churches in a day if you get on public transport, and it is really weird because they're all built at the same time, but they all look completely different. Or they're built.
I'll bring up pictures. I'll bring up pictures of the different ones during the things so people can see them.
I mean, the one I'll say again, the one in the city of London, what's called St Mary Woolnoth, that was him deliberately trying to recreate the Temple of Solomon, which is about as Masonic gets. So that one in particular has some very Masonic features.
And then also we've got Guy Fawkes. He was a patsy for a false flag attack to basically blame Catholics by Robert Cecil, the evil hunchback. Who is the focus for Shakespeare's play Richard II.
Yes.
Yeah, and and we briefly talked about India as well, and how Britain messed up that last night. So so we touched on so many different topics in one book, and I think that's why it keeps you interested, though, because you're moving around to different topics, and you go, whoa, Shakespeare wasn't real. Whoa, the Great Fire of London wasn't, what I think it was. And I think that's good. It keeps you going. And it's a very interesting read. I can't even remember how long ago it was I read it now, so I'm quite proud of myself for remembering most of this.
Honestly, it's really weird and lovely that people have read it. I've never written a book before, so I've never had a book for people to read, and it's just people come up and say all kinds of things. Mainly people say nothing really changes, does it? Because it doesn't. It's just these are really good examples of historically ways people have tried to screw people over, and it kind of, for my mind, it kind of has equipped me better to understand the here and now.
We'll call that the end. I'll say thank you to everyone for watching. Make sure you go on to Britain's Hidden History if you're interested in that. Sign up to the Facebook group. Make sure you check out Architecture of Power. You can get it on the Commonoglyphics website, which is probably the best way to do so. Or you can, I think they sell it at Waterstones. There's Amazon, but fuck Amazon. But no, you can get it from Amazon. They've got it on Kindle. So if you already have a Kindle Unlimited, that's you've got a pass straight away to go in and read that. That's the way I read it. So. Sorry about that.
You didn't pay for it.
Well, I already had the Kindle Unlimited, so you know.
You see, I know why you told me this last. I would have refused to do this if you no.
Yeah, that's why I kept it down low, you know. Never revealed. But yeah, and everyone, make sure if you're interested in what Rob was talking about with the Commonoglyphics, the book about the Welsh and the hieroglyphs connection. I've talked about this before, but you can get that from Commonoglyphics as well as most of Alan Wilson's books. If they're still being printed, they're on that website. Even some of his first 3 books, which you can't get hold of, they've been made into PDFs that you can get hold of now. So that is excellent. All of that's on there. And thank you so much to Rob for giving us all of this time to explain all this stuff. You basically don't even need to buy the book anymore. So he's kind of shot himself in the foot a bit with this. But make sure you do anyway, because he's hidden things in there that he refused to talk about. But
yes, I play hard to get. Well, don't I?
Exactly. Thank you very much, and we'll catch you guys on the next interview. We'll definitely have Rob back soon, and you might see me over on the Britain's Hidden History channel at some point in the future. Who knows? But yeah, thank you very much, guys.